And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. You've probably heard those words before and thought, oh yeah, Genesis 6, the story of the Watchers, aka the sons of God, who came down and created the giants with human women. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've heard those verses from Genesis 6 countless times. Only I wasn't quoting from Genesis 6 just now. I was reading from Enoch 6. And that portion of Enoch is not only word for word almost similar to how Genesis 6 begins, but then it goes off in another direction that informs us of some of the details of the pre-flood world. Insights that will help us understand what was so bad about the days of Noah that caused God to want to wipe out virtually all life on the planet. I mean, eradicating 99.9% of humanity? God doesn't overreact. What was so bad about the world that required that degree of wiping it all away? And remember, Enoch was Jesus' history book. So could what we learn in Enoch 6 give us an idea of what Jesus meant when he said the end times would be as it was in the days of Noah? I find Enoch 6 to be weird, and I'd like to explore what it helps us to understand about our Bible. Turn to Genesis 6, and let's get weird. Welcome to Weird Stuff in the Bible, where we explore scripture passages that are bizarre, perplexing, or just plain weird. This is Luke Taylor, and today we're going to be talking about what we can learn when we pair Genesis 6 with Enoch 6. So there's this word that we have for the pre-flood world. It's called the antediluvian period. And if you've ever heard the word antediluvian, that is what it's talking about. The prefix ante, it means before, and diluvian means flood. Not to be confused with a DeLorean, which can take you to the time of the flood, but after you listen to today's episode, you may not want to go there. So we'll be talking about this antediluvian period today and sort of cracking the case wide open on what it was like. Because the Bible is kind of thin on the details. It tells us just what we need to know, and the details that it does give, it can kind of leave us with more questions than answers. And there's been a lot of episodes of this podcast trying to provide some of those answers. And what am I talking about? Well, let's go to Genesis 6, 1 and 2. It reads, When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The sons of God in this verse, this is talking about supernatural beings, and make no mistake, when it says that they found the daughters of men attractive, they didn't just come down to look. They didn't just come down to hang out at the beach and then go home and watch some Netflix with them. They came down to Netflix and chill. And this created the giants, or the Nephilim, of the antediluvian world. Genesis 6:4 says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And that's how Genesis puts it. And the phrase mighty men is gibborim, and this is a word that can mean someone quite famous, or perhaps even infamous. It's also used to describe other giants in Scripture, and it can be used for ordinary humans who became well-known as well. These particular gibborim in Genesis 6:4, they were famous in the bad way, hence this idea of infamy. Now let's compare Genesis 6 with Enoch chapter 6's opening lines. It says, And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. So it's very, very similar to what the Bible says. This is what I read at the start of the episode. Now, one distinction is that the Genesis account, it was written in Hebrew, and so it called the supernatural beings the sons of God. The book of Enoch right here, which is based on Greek manuscripts, it calls them angels, children of heaven. Well, that's because the Greek, it's just a lot more broad than the Hebrew. In Greek, the word angel, it can apply to any supernatural being. It could even apply to bad ones, like the ones right here, I guess. And there's other Enoch manuscripts that will call these the Watchers right here. And that's a phrase that we'll see a lot more later. Another detail that it includes in Enoch's account is it uses the phrase, saw and lusted after them. Michael Heiser's commentary on this verse, it says, the verb epithemian, I'm sure I'm not saying that right, seems to have the pejorative meaning of to lust after. Since this desire and its fulfillment are outlawed, as the context will indicate, the use of this verb introduces the motif of sin. And then a third major difference from the biblical account, or minor difference, I'm sorry, this is just a minor difference from the biblical account, but the Enoch version, it gives a little more insight into what these fallen angels were thinking. See, Genesis said, and they took as their wives any they chose. In Enoch's version, he writes this. He says, they said to one another, come, let us choose wives from among the children of men and beget us children. So we see in Enoch's account that he implies that they desired not just the women, but to have kids and that they would have families. And so perhaps they'd just been watching humans marry and produce children and populate the world for generation after generation. And maybe they got kind of jealous and they wanted kids of their own. And that would have been still wrong, but maybe that's the more sentimental interpretation about what was going on. In my opinion, this is more about world domination. They didn't just want families so that they could, have the Christmas photos with everybody wearing matching pajamas. This was a plot to take over the world. If you listen to our episodes last year on spiritual legal rights, we talked a lot about the dominion mandate of man, how mankind was given authority to rule the world in Genesis 1, and how Satan has been trying to steal that authority ever since. So, since man had primary rule over the world, these watchers decided to create half-man, half-angel hybrids who were able to exercise legal rights over this physical realm. Their Nephilim children could fulfill the dominion mandate that was granted to man, something the watchers could never do up in heaven. If these Nephilim replaced humanity, then the watchers could control both the physical and spiritual realms of earth. And not only that, they could prevent the Messiah from coming, because the Messiah had been prophesied to someday come from the seed of a human woman. But by corrupting the entire bloodline of planet Earth, they could stop God's plan to redeem the world. In his commentary on Enoch, Timothy Alberino says, they plan to usurp dominion of the earth through the agency of their human hybrid offspring. So, when the watchers are saying here, let us choose wives and beget us children, they aren't talking about wanting to have pancake breakfast on Saturday morning with the wife and kids. They want to corrupt the whole world. If we jump to Enoch 19 for a minute, and that's a very short chapter, it's only 3 verses, and we're going to come up to it again later, but I just want to read a couple of the verses. Enoch 19, 1 and 2, they say, Here shall stand the angels who have connected themselves with women, and their spirits, assuming many different forms, are defiling mankind, and shall lead them astray into sacrificing to demons as gods. Here they shall stand till the day of great judgment, in which they shall be judged till they are made an end of. And the women also of the angels who went astray shall become sirens. So, a few notes on this. The watchers who came down, they are able to assume many different forms. Okay, more on that in a few minutes. But it also said that they want to lead mankind astray by causing them to sacrifice to demons as gods. And we see this idea throughout the Bible, false gods being worshipped. And Paul even says in 1 Corinthians 10:20, I imply that what pagans sacrifice, they offer to demons and not to God. So Paul says that pagan worship, it's not just empty words spoken into nothingness, but that it's an offering made to an evil supernatural entity. And that's what the watchers were trying to lead mankind into. They wanted themselves to be worshipped as gods. Now, what does it mean if a spiritual being is worshipped as a god? What does that do for them? Well, in the spiritual realm, this gives them legal rights. It gives them a spiritual legal right to visit and control territory on planet Earth. And I did several episodes about this last year. I was looking at the function of pagan altars in the Bible and the battle over physical space here in our world. So by having demonic spawn walking around here, the Nephilim weren't just physically oppressive, but they also had this role of inciting mankind to worship their fathers, the Watchers, as deities. And I believe the Nephilim themselves also wanted to be worshipped. So this gave them and the Watchers both a physical and spiritual domination of Earth. Now, one more comment I would like to make on these words. Were the women that the sons of God married willing participants in this arrangement? or were they forced to reproduce with the Watchers against their will? Well, good scholars can differ on this point, so let me just break it down. And by the way, the next couple minutes, this part might not be suitable for young ears. I've tried to keep it as family-friendly as I can up to this point, but if you have kids around, like this might be the part to skip ahead to the next section. So were the women here, were they happy to be taken as wives? Well, the Genesis text says this: the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. And again, the Enochian text says, come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men and beget us children. So the Genesis text, it could be taken to mean that the women were quote unquote taken, or essentially raped, and forced to bear these children against their will. The Hebrew word there is lakach, and it can, not always, but it can mean to seize or to snatch. And so it's legitimate to translate it as that these women were taken away captive as part of some kind of breeding program like you might see in some kind of horror movie. For example, another verse that uses lakach and speaks of a rape, it's when Shechem has sexual relations with Dinah, which is one of Jacob's daughters. Genesis 34:2, it says, now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her, that's the word lakach right there, and lay with her and humiliated her. So that word seized, it's clear that it's talking about a rape right there. So there are some who conclude, quite reasonably, that these women in Genesis 6, that they certainly did not desire to have relations with the angels, and so they must have been forced to do so against their will. On the other hand, the word lakach for took as their wives, it does not have to mean forced wives. There's lots of times that lakach can mean a woman is willingly taken as a wife. For example, Deuteronomy 24:5. It says, when a man is newly married, he shall not go out with the army or be liable for any other public duty. He shall be free at home 1 year to be happy with his wife whom he has taken. So that's just a rule in the Deuteronomy, like the Pentateuch. That's just a rule for that when a man is a newlywed, he stays home for a year from battle. Nothing inappropriate implied in that kind of marriage at all. It also says this in Genesis 24:4, where Abraham is telling his servant, go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. And so that would have been Rebekah who was quote unquote taken. Now there's nothing implied about Rebekah being taken against her will. She consented to marrying Isaac. She was happy to. You know, it sounds weird to us today if someone said, I took so-and-so as my wife. That might sound kind of weird. We might say, well, what did she have to say about it? But in the biblical language, it is perfectly normal to say that you took someone as your wife. It does not imply that anything was amiss. Now, it can be taken that way, but it doesn't have to. So I'll say I tend to believe that the women were willing participants in this arrangement in Genesis 6. And I'm not saying that means their guilt was equal to the Watchers, but I don't believe that they were innocent either. Let me just remind you again of these words from Enoch 19. It said, and the women also of the angels who went astray shall become sirens. Now, there's a lot of debate over this word sirens and what exactly it means. Whatever it means, it ain't good. And so my point is the women would not be punished if they were not morally culpable for what had happened. So we'll get to Enoch 19 down the road, but for today, let me just say my conclusion on the matter. I think the women willfully got with the angels. And remember, it said of when the Watchers came down, it said, quote, their spirits assuming many different forms. So, what do you imagine whenever you think of them coming down? Do you imagine slimy reptilian creatures, sparkly old men with beards? It's possible, but I think it's more likely that they came down as attractive, gorgeous, muscular chads, okay? Something that the women would themselves lust after and find desirable. I don't think it would have served their purpose to come down looking scary or repulsive at all. They didn't just want a one-night stand. They wanted wives. So if they could assume many different forms, then I predict that they would pick a pretty good one, okay? Look more like Chris Hemsworth than Danny DeVito. So let's read the next verse of Enoch 6. And in this one, we're going to meet one of the two main villains of this book of Enoch. Enoch 6:3. And Semjaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And I'll keep going, verse 4. And they all answered him and said, "Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." Then swear they all together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. So, who is Semjaza? He never gets a mention in the Bible, but he is prominent right here in Enoch as the leader of this heavenly rebellion. So there are a few different spellings out there. The one that I go by, it's spelled Semjaza. So there's a J in there, but I believe the J is supposed to be pronounced like a Y. But others might spell it more like Semjaza or Semjaza. Semjaza is one of the watchers, and his name actually means gazes from the heavens. Remember what their job was. It was to watch over mankind from up in heaven. These are members of something that's called the Divine Council of God, who assist him in ruling the world. And we'll see later that the watchers are distributed across the world to each have their own sector to supervise. But that might have just been after the Tower of Babel incident. And I'm going to share some more findings about that later. It's not super relevant here. But I'm just recapping, though. The watchers, they're supposed to remain up in heaven. They have a job to do up there. And so it was wrong for them to go down to earth and to physically interact with women in this way. And they knew it. Jude 6 speaks of this moment, and it says, "And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day." So the eternal chains part hasn't come up yet at this point in Enoch, but just focus on the first part. Jude says, the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but they left their proper dwelling. You see, Jude was reading the same book of Enoch that we are reading right here. They knew what they were doing was wrong. Semjaza recognizes that it's going to be a great sin. And so as he comes up with this plan to descend to the earth, he turns to his fellow rebel watchers. He's like, I'm afraid that I'm going to go down there, and that when I do, you're all going to desert me and get me in big trouble with God. And so he demands that they all promise to stick to the plan with him. And not just promise, it says that they bind themselves by mutual imprecations. And so there is something cosmically going on here that I don't quite understand, but there is some meaning to this language of binding and loosing that forces spiritual beings to obey. And this is why Jesus taught us to pray prayers of binding and loosing in Matthew 16. And so these fallen angels, it says they bind themselves to carry out the plan. Verse 5 again. Then swear they all together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. So now let's finish up chapter 6. It's going to tell us how many watchers came down to earth to enact this plan. It'll tell us where they came down, and it's going to tell us the names of 20 of the leaders of this gang. So get ready to hear a bunch of angel names. It's kind of interesting because the Bible is usually pretty silent on angel names, but Enoch gives us a lot of them. So here's Enoch 6, verses 6 through 8. And they were in all 200 who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are the names of their leaders: Semjaza their leader, Arakibah, Ramiel, Kokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Daniel, Ezekiel, Barakiel, Azazel, Armaros, Badarel, Ananel, Zachiel, Zamsapiel, Sadarel, Torel, Jamjael, and Sariel. These are their chiefs of tens. So there are a couple of threads that I read in those verses right there that we are going to pick up on in future episodes, probably later this month. Specifically, I really want to talk about the days of Jared, and I want to talk about the significance of Mount Hermon. So we're going to put a pin in those for now because I'm totally not skipping over it. I'm just not focusing on that today. I will note that it said there were 200 angels. That is how many watchers descended and did this plan. Now, how many watchers were there to begin with? Like, were there just 200 total? And so all 200 of God's watchers were rebelling right here? Possibly, but I doubt it. Were there thousands or millions of watchers? Again, it's possible, but I doubt it. My best guess is that 1/3 of the watchers rebel. I'm going to guess that there were 600 watchers or sons of God, and 200 of them decided to rebel. And so when I say that, maybe you think of this too in Revelation 12:3 and 4. It says, and another sign appeared in heaven, behold, a great red dragon, this is the devil, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. So that verse is speaking about how Satan has been able to seduce 1/3 of God's angels into following him into rebellion, and that could possibly be referring to the events of Genesis 6. But I'm also guessing it was 1/3 because that actually points to a pattern that we just see again and again through Scripture. Satan corrupting 1 in 3. We saw it there in Revelation 12. You can look at how Adam and Eve had 3 sons that are named at least in Scripture: Cain, Abel, and Seth, and Satan corrupted Cain. We see that Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Satan corrupted Ham. When Satan filled the land of Canaan with Nephilim in the Old Testament, it said they had 33 kings. Moses and Joshua defeated them all. I believe it was 33 because that's a number that kind of represents 1/3. And you see the number 33 show up a lot in paganism and satanic rituals. I could go down a whole rabbit hole of examples on that, but I don't want anybody out there getting paranoid about the number 33 and thinking it's like a cursed number or something. Guys, 33 is just a number, but I'm just saying there is a pattern that it's like 33 or 1/3. It can often be associated with Satan's corruption. Now, Jesus, he was 33 whenever he became a curse for us and died on the cross. And some scholars count 33 miracles of Jesus recorded across the 4 Gospels. Now, is that just a coincidence? Does it imply that Jesus is undoing Satan's corruption? I have no idea. I'm not teaching a doctrine by this. I'm just pointing out a pattern that I've noticed, and I don't mean to distract from the point today, but I'm telling you that's why I think it was probably 1/3 of the Watchers who rebelled. And again, Enoch's book, it does not outright mention Satan, but I have no doubt that Satan was sneaking around behind the scenes and maybe planting some of these ideas or inciting some of this, but Satan was smart enough and cunning enough to stay out of it. And anyway, guys, I was afraid this would happen. I've got a whole lot more I wanted to share today about the antediluvian world, but I'm just running out of time for this week. So this is going to end up having to be a part 1, and we'll pick it up again next week. The thing I really wanted to get into was the forbidden knowledge that the Watchers shared with mankind. And so this is going to be described in Enoch chapters 7 and 8. It's going to help contextualize a lot of other things in Scripture. And so I really can't wait to get into all that. Unfortunately, we just can't do it today. So make sure you're subscribed, and you're going to get all the future episodes as we do go into these things. There's too much there to even stick into the newsletter. So we'll just do a whole episode on that, the forbidden knowledge of the Watchers. That's probably what I will talk about next time. So, and I will have a newsletter this week because I want to answer this question. Some people reject the understanding of Genesis 6 that I laid out today, which is the supernatural view of it, and they'll point to Jesus' words in Mark 12:25. For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. So there's many Christians who will say that this quote from Jesus, that it would disprove the book of Enoch's account of the Watchers, since he said angels don't marry. And so I would like to answer that question, and I would like to look at Jesus' words there very carefully. And so I'm going to release a short newsletter doing that this coming Sunday. And if you'd like to receive the newsletter, you can click on the link in the show notes. And if you find this episode later on, you can use that same link in the show notes to find an archive of all the past newsletters as well. And by the way, shout out to Danny, who is an official weirdo. I used to say that if you listen to at least 25 episodes, then you must be pretty weird. Well, he said he has listened to all 107 up to this point. And so, hey, anyone else who's a weirdo out there listening, if you haven't let me know that yet, please send me an email. I'd love to tell the world how weird you really are. So in closing today, and again, we're not closing this whole subject because I want to keep rolling on through with it next week. But in closing, I would like to address this statement from Jesus. It says in Matthew 24, verses 36 through 39, talking about his second coming, he says, "But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man." Now, what is Jesus saying with these words? Well, the most obvious way that he means it is this. He's saying that whenever he returns someday, and it's a very plain New Testament doctrine, Jesus is coming back. He's saying that when he does, there's going to be a whole lot of people who had simply believed that life was going to go on forever, that they didn't believe the judgment of God was about to fall, that there's still going to be people who were getting up in the morning, eating breakfast, going to work, making long-term plans, on and on. It doesn't mean there weren't awful things going on around planet Earth at the end of time. It just means there's going to be many people who ignore the signs of the times and they are in denial that God's judgment was about to fall. And so, as it was in the days of Noah, it can be taken to mean exactly that when the flood came, it caught a lot of people off guard because they had no warning. Well, they did have a warning, but they refused to listen to the warnings. And so that might be all that Jesus meant by that phrase. And I have no problem with that interpretation. I think that interpretation is obvious. But is that all that Jesus meant with those words? Or was Jesus implying that things that happened in Noah's day would also be happening in the end times? Things like spiritual beings descending to the earth, taking on various forms, and deceiving mankind. Well, I believe that could certainly be possible. There are other places in Scripture that speak of great signs in the heavens. Jesus himself said in Luke 21:1, there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. I did an episode last fall about this, that the signs from heaven, it's this Greek word phobotron. It can mean the boogeyman. It's this idea of mythological beings, or perhaps beings who we thought were myth, descending from the skies. Well, there's a lot of debate right now. You probably see it in the news, people talking about aliens and whether they could be real, whether they could be trying to communicate with mankind. And I don't really believe in aliens in like the traditional sense, but if beings like the Watchers, if they decided to return to Earth once again, we would probably think of them as aliens. So if they can assume many different forms, perhaps they could assume some kind of alien form. And it might not necessarily be something grotesque, some kind of scaly being like that you see in a monster movie. They could be seductive and beautiful beings. Doesn't it say Satan himself can masquerade as an angel of light? And speaking of Satan, there is a prophecy given about the devil in Genesis 3. After Adam and Eve sinned, God said these words in Genesis 3:15, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. The word offspring right there is seed. And it means the same thing, an offspring, a seed, a descendant, a child. And we all know who the seed of the woman was that would bruise or crush Satan's head. Obviously, that was Jesus. That part of the prophecy is 100% clear. It's not even really disputed. But what about the seed of the serpent? Who is the offspring of the devil? Well, some have said that the Genesis 6 account of the Watchers coming down and mating with the women, that was the seed of the serpent. And that's possible, but neither the book of Enoch nor the Bible gives Satan any direct credit for this plan of the Watchers. Again, I'm sure he was involved somewhere behind the scenes, but he wasn't one of the ones mating with women. And so he has not actually produced a seed or offspring just yet. But I wonder, could he try to do so in the end times? There is a world ruler who is said to come on the scene in the last days who tries to wipe out all the Christians and Jews during the tribulation, a man who is known as the Antichrist. Could the Antichrist be the seed of Satan? And could the Antichrist's creation be due to an event like what happened in the days of Noah? Or could he have some kind of DNA that's been tampered with? Now, all of this is speculation. I'm not claiming anything today. I'm just sharing some possibilities. And I would say this, there's been a lot of alien stuff in the news for the past few years. It's quite interesting. But I just encourage you, always look at all of these stories through a biblical lens and don't just believe whatever the media says. And I did get this email from Joe. He's a listener from North Carolina. And he shared some of these thoughts after my recent episode on the sky monsters of Luke 21. It says, it's no coincidence that Roswell, the first modern UFO incident, occurred in 1947. There were many end-time things that popped up around that time. Nuclear weapons were deployed in 1945. ENIAC, the first general-purpose computer, was unveiled in 1946. 1947 had the Roswell UFO incident, the 1947 flying disc craze, and the CIA was formed. And of course, Israel became a nation again in 1948. And you could say that Israel was a major prophetic event that showed us that we could be at the end times. And I'll mention one more thing that happened around that time. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in Qumran in 1947. These were a collection of ancient writings that include much of the Old Testament and the Book of Enoch, which we studied right here today. The Book of Enoch was lost to the world for much of church history, and it's only in the past 75 years or so that it's really had a major comeback. And an interesting thing about it is that Enoch, even though he lived in the antediluvian time back at the beginning of the world, said that he was writing to the generation who would see the end of the world. And that might just be us, as his book has really just been restored to the church right here in our generation. And if the world has not ended by this time next week, then we'll be right here again to study Enoch's book some more. Thanks for listening. God bless you for sticking around till the end, and we'll see you next time on Weird Stuff in the Bible.